This is a presentation by me called On Improving Race Relations. I have been black my whole life. Shocking, I know. So it makes me happy to be aware that most of you believe that racism has a negative effect on society as a whole. But today, I'm going to address those who may not share the same outlook. It might be hard for some of you to believe, but not all black men are violent criminals. Some of us intend to contribute something meaningful to society before we die. Look how far we've come as a society. We had our first black president. The election of President Barack Obama, regardless of how you feel about him, demonstrates so much progress in this country. We need to keep going. We can't stop now after coming this far, and we can't turn back. We are so close to living in an ideal society. I understand this may or may not surprise you. Consider this if it does. You cannot help anyone until you help yourself first. And only then can you give back to your community. It is my belief that we need to help black men help everyone else. Let's talk about some of the systemic barriers that black men are facing on a daily basis in this day and age. Who and what is responsible, and how we can eliminate them. Brace yourselves, because we are about to have an uncomfortable conversation. To understand the cause of the serious problem that is systemic racism, we must first look into the history of the United States. As Michael Shermer points out in a special issue of Race Matters, race still means a lot to people in America, even though racist attitudes have improved over the past half century. But the truth is that race is actually a social construct. Social, political, and economic mechanisms were the true origin of the concept of race. There isn't any actual genetic basis for the concept of race. Indeed, all humans are 99.9% genetically identical. So how did these social, political, and economic mechanisms contributing to the conception of race come about? Let's talk about what happened after the Civil War. Even after black slaves were freed, the absence of federal troops to enforce black civil rights enabled states in the former Confederacy to construct a new system of racial oppression called Jim Crow that effectively made blacks second-class citizens. Blacks were segregated from whites and relegated to menial occupations, inferior schools, dilapidated housing, and deficient faculties throughout Southern society. Jim Crow was enforced by violence that was often lethal. Here are two quick statistics for you. 90% of blacks lived in the South between 1876 and 1900. 83% were poor. By 1970, half of all blacks in America had moved out of the South to urban areas, and so the ghetto emerged. Whites didn't like this, so they created neighborhood improvement associations that pressured landlords not to rent to blacks and pressured blacks to live elsewhere by means of persuasion, payoffs, or violence. Thankfully, residential segregation ended with the Great Depression in 1929, thanks to Franklin Roosevelt. but problems persisted due to the institutionalization of redlining. Whites started leaving the inner cities to live in the suburbs, and so the ghetto expanded again, unfortunately. But it didn't stop there. Whites didn't like blacks encroaching on their universities, hospitals, museums, and businesses. So they took action to control black neighborhoods. Whites demolished the homes of black families and established public housing for them to live in, as they had nowhere else to go. In theory, segregation was supposed to end after the civil rights era, but in reality, it has not. It continues even past 2010, despite efforts to address it. Yet, racial attitudes have improved drastically since the 1960s. Only 13% of whites believed that neighborhoods should remain segregated by the 1980s. And you have to give credit where credit is due. Overt racism has certainly declined, as it has been deemed socially unacceptable. But covert racism still persists. For example, racial gaps in loan denials for homes have barely improved in 40 years. Let's expose some unconscious bias. Researchers conducted a resume study where they sent potential employers the same resume, changing only the names from white names to black names. They found that people with white names were called for interviews more often than those with black-sounding names, irrespective of the applicant's actual race. Not only that, blacks with no criminal record are called back just as frequently as whites who were recently incarcerated. And so you can see that the echoes of Jim Crow still reverberate throughout our collective consciousness. It's hard to address biases when you're not aware of them. And that takes us to my second point. To put it simply, the cause of racism is ignorance. Not in the sense of a lack of intelligence, but rather a lack of awareness. Good people are making bad decisions, and they don't even know it most of the time. This is largely due to the negative stereotypes about blacks that still pervade society, and is evident by a lack of tolerance for social dichotomies. For example, whites in neighborhoods decline as blacks in neighborhoods increase. The mere presence of blacks in neighborhoods denotes lower property values, higher crime rates, and lower academic achievement. And that's not because blacks are a bunch of ignorant monkeys, as some have claimed to me before. No, the problems in the black community are the result of a self-fulfilling prophecy. After years of conditioning, blacks have chosen to adopt the racist narratives that are rooted so deep in our country's history. This is what we call internalized racism. People are racist even when they don't want to be, and people can be racist themselves even. It's a sad reality. Segregation and barriers to upward mobility for blacks have caused neighborhoods to become the nexus for black socioeconomic disadvantage. Income inequality and social immobility explains the poor neighborhood conditions of Black communities. And that's not good for anyone, considering the current state of affairs. Stereotypes grossly exaggerate statistics as they ignore individuality and diversity within the Black community. This is because segregation has allowed whites to remain unexposed to the various social dichotomies within the African diaspora. It's hard to understand a group of people who you rarely interact with. So let's talk about why we should actively make an effort to get to know each other better. Increasing social awareness is the solution to all of our problems. Conscious awareness, deliberate thought, and the motivation to link values to behavior cannot be underestimated as a vehicle for change in the way society functions. And that is your incentive to promote social awareness. If you want to change, then you have to choose to change. No one can force you to. So if you're interested in changing, then you must also be willing to adopt a skeptical attitude. I believe that people can and will change if they understand that ignorance is not the answer. And it's not. Take it from me. We have to avoid deluding ourselves into believing that solving the problem that is systemic racism is as simple as removing a few racists from power. Ibram X. Kendi, an expert on critical race theory, wrote in How to Be an Anti-Racist that a person still supports racism unless they deliberately work to oppose it. Anti-racism is defined as actively working to dismantle the racist structures of society. Anti-racism has only gained traction in the American public as recently as the 2010s. Civil rights leaders are examples of anti-racists. If you respect and admire Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for his accomplishments, then perhaps you should follow in his footsteps. Do what he would have done in situations where you catch yourself or others being racist. It's not your fault. But if you want to change, then you need to hold yourself accountable. Thinking of Black people as equals, which most of you know deep down in your hearts to be true, does not disqualify you from being racist. Anti-racists work to dismantle racism within themselves as well as throughout society. It is nothing more than an unfortunate consequence of growing up in a systemically racist country that people will have racist tendencies. It's not your fault, but that does not excuse you from your responsibility to stop the spread of ill will between humans on this planet. Stopping the spread of racist messages used to justify racist policies starts with identifying your own racist attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors and modifying them. Critics of anti-racism argue that it is merely performative or emotionally satisfying and fails to achieve its intended purpose. Call-out culture, better known as cancel culture, is what has truly failed to motivate people to change their attitudes toward Black people. Why? Because shaming you for living lives you didn't choose is probably the worst motivation for you to change your behavior. The goal of teaching critical race theory in K through 12 public schools isn't to teach white people to feel ashamed or guilty for their racist or oppressive behaviors. Shame is nothing more than an unfortunate but inevitable consequence of breaking down the system of oppression within yourself. No pain, no gain. As time goes on, you will feel it less and less until you don't feel it at all, because you have freed yourself from the racism within you. We don't want to teach blacks to have a victim mentality either. Our struggle is not pointless, but it must be recognized if we are going to move forward. Ignorance is not bliss, as is evident by the current state of affairs. It's hard to predict the effects of teaching CRT in schools, but the only way to find out is to try. I'm very optimistic that I can if I can persuade you to join my cause, we will all reap rewards. I think that teaching critical race theory in public schools will help foster a more informed, equitable, and empathetic learning environment. Racism divides us. Divided we are weak. And I fear for our future. Someone I once knew happened to be racist. I still respected and admired him for his courage, bravery, strength, and perseverance. I was sad to hear that he died recently. I cannot call him my friend, but I loved him like a brother. I've given you the facts. We've talked about how systemic racism is the result of years of conditioning across centuries, and what we can do to stop the spread of negativity. It's up to you what you want to do with the facts. You can choose to feel guilty about them, or you can choose to actually do something to change the ugly reality we all live in. Just know that ignoring the facts isn't helping anyone. I hope this presentation has helped to explain the current state of affairs in this country, and I truly hope that the information I've provided will aid you as you navigate social dichotomies in the future. Maybe next time you meet a black person, you could do me a favor and give them a fist bump. It would go a long way to showing the world that we don't have to be enemies. We can all get along while we live healthy and happy lives together. Thank you.